Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about a pretty important Supreme Court case. You might have heard of it, it's Lee v. Weisman. This case deals with something a lot of us are familiar with, school graduation ceremonies. This raised a huge question about whether prayers should be allowed at public school events. We're Miss Henson and Miss Thompson, and we'll walk you through what happened, why it ended up in the Supreme Court, and what the decision means for schools across the country. Let's get into it. The first party of this case is petitioner Mr. Robert E. Lee. He was the principal of the public middle school in Providence, Rhode Island. He invited the rabbi to deliver a prayer at the graduation ceremony. He represented public school systems and defended the practice as a ceremonial tradition. The second party of this case is respondent Mr. Daniel Weisman. He was a parent of the middle school student, Deborah Weisman, who was graduating from the school. He objected to the inclusion of a clergy-led prayer. Then, he challenged the school's prayer practice as unconstitutional.
Hello, I'm Taryn Thompson, and we're going to be diving deeper into the Lee versus Weisman case as we explore religious freedom and how it affects this case. The first thing that comes to mind when talking about religious freedom in law would of course be the Establishment Clause, where in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, it prohibits the establishment of religion by Congress. What really happened in the Lee versus Weisman case? To start off with some basic facts, Weisman was offended by the school prayer proposed by Principal Lee, and Weisman did not want his daughter to miss graduation because of a little prayer, because, graduation is a huge thing in people's lives. It's a passage into the next grade, into the next school, into the next era of your life. Very important to most families. Not only is graduation an important part of people's lives, but when you are in a setting around your peers and your students that you've grown up with, there's a lot of peer pressure when it comes to acknowledging a prayer. If everyone else did it, so do I. It's very, very difficult to step out and be different. So being in that position could be tough for Weisman here. Another fact that we do need to note is that Nathan Bishop Middle School is a public school. With Nathan Bishop Middle School being a public school, that means Abington School District v. Shemp and Ingle v. Vitale are applicable. Abington v. Shemp and Ingle v. Vitale are both applicable here because they both limit or prohibit public school prayer and public Bible reading. However, the prayer stated at the ceremony was not targeted toward one religion, so in theory, it does not force anybody to follow a certain religion. This is referred to as non-sectarian. Even though the prayer did not refer to any religion, similarly, non-sectarian prayers had been previously struck down under the Establishment Clause. In this case, there is a violation of the Establishment Clause where, it prohibits the establishment of religion by Congress, and in this particular area, the Congress would be the public school, and that's a form of government here in this situation. However, we can conduct a Lemon test, brought up by the Lemon v. Kurtzman case, and the Lemon test is to determine if a law violates the Establishment Clause. In the Lemon test, it requires secular purpose, so the law must have a secular, non-religious purpose. Primary effect, the law's principle or primary effect must neither advance nor inhibit religion, and no excessive entanglement. The law must not foster excessive government and entanglement with religion. To summarize these facts, essentially, Weisman was uncomfortable with this prayer and did not want his daughter to participate in it, while the principal did not see the issue in having a school prayer as a tradition here in this graduation.
First issue was government-endorsed religion. This case challenged whether a public school, which is a government entity, could have a clergy-led prayer at a graduation ceremony. This raised concerns about whether the school was endorsing religion, which could infringe on the religious freedom of students and families who may not share the same beliefs. The school is part of the government, so when it invited a religious leader to pray, it looked like the government was supporting religion. The second issue was freedom of belief. The court emphasized that even the smallest pressure on students to participate in a religious exercise, like standing or remaining silent during a prayer, could be impactful, especially for impressionable students. This was seen as a violation of individual religious freedom, but it could make students feel compelled to conform to a religious practice against their beliefs. Even if students weren't forced to pray, they might feel pressure to take part, which isn't fair to students who believe differently or don't want to be involved in religious activities. The third issue is religious neutrality. By ruling that the school cannot include a prayer in a public ceremony, the court reinforced that government institutions must remain neutral in religious matters. This ensures that no one is forced, directly or indirectly, to participate in a religious activity. This protection supports freedom from religion as much as freedom of religion. So the court decided that public schools should stay neutral when it comes to it. That way, everyone's religious belief is protected. No one is pushed towards any particular belief.
Disagree with the court's decision here. Honestly, no one is being forced to listen to the prayer, to hear the prayer, or to do anything with the prayer. Essentially, with the prayer being stated, you are not being called to action, and there are no consequences if you listen or do not listen to this prayer. Also, when going to a graduation ceremony, everything is about tradition, super traditional. So why is this tradition of stating a prayer that is not targeted toward anyone, how is that different from stating the Pledge of Allegiance every single day throughout elementary school, throughout high school? How is that different saying, one nation under God? I don't see how that would be different from, having a tradition as an American to reciting a school prayer that has nothing to do with one specific religion. And this brings me to my next point. This is very extreme to go to court over a simple prayer being traditionally brought up in a graduation ceremony. Does one prayer at graduation really ruin the entire moment? And that's where I come in with the, why did we go to the court with this in the first place? Extreme emotional distress was not reached here. Having a prayer at a graduation is standard. Having traditions at a graduation is standard. Everybody does it, and nobody seems to bat an eye, so I don't understand why this would bring severe emotional distress on somebody. Also, within this case, there was no consequences if you didn't do the prayer. So a person should be completely comfortable knowing that whatever decision they make, that there's going to be no consequences. They're not going to get assaulted. There will be no battery. They will not be falsely imprisoned. And I don't believe there is negligence here because every party knew what they were doing and they didn't, intend to cause severe emotional distress over this, which I don't believe is present here. I don't understand where somebody would miss an entire graduation because of one little prayer and ignore all of their hard work throughout these years just because of one little tiny part of the graduation ceremony. And finally, this brings me back to my last point where we go back to the Lemon v. Kurtzman and the Lemon test. Because the prayer being stated was not specific to any religion, I believe that the intent of the prayer was purely traditional and a rite of passage onto our next era in life. Also, it was the principal who suggested the prayer, and I don't feel like there was excessive, and that's the key word there, excessive government involvement. And I don't believe that this case violates the Establishment Clause according to the Lemon test.